Man, this episode's going to be a tough one, but it's going to be an important one. Welcome to the Star Wars Mark of Balance podcast. My name is Mark, and today we will be looking at the light side of The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi, probably the most divisive film in Star Wars, and rekindled the toxic fan culture in the Star Wars fandom. And I've been looking forward to this episode since I made the podcast. Ever since I thought of the idea to do some sort of media creation for Star Wars, I knew The Last Jedi would be my most important episode, no matter what I did. Because it causes such a visceral reaction, whether you liked it or you didn't like it. Last Jedi has almost become like politics. If you're on one side, you're the enemy. If you're on the other side, you're also the enemy. And one of my goals when I set out to make this podcast was I wanted to take some of that toxicity out of the Star Wars fan culture. Aside from loving Star Wars, I wanted everyone to love Star Wars regardless of what they liked about it. Hence the name Mark of Balance. I didn't want to take sides. I wanted to look at Star Wars objectively, what I think it does well, and what I think it doesn't do well, and look at the movies and media and put it under a microscope. And in the end, if you agree with my light side stuff, and you like the movie because of that, great. If you don't like a movie because of the dark side that I bring up in that episode, great. But in the end, we're all on the same team. We're all Star Wars fans. So I want to take those both sides, bring them together, and find the value in The Last Jedi. Now I'm going to start this off as controversial as possible. Star Wars The Last Jedi is thematically the best sequel trilogy film. I know that probably just made half my audience turn this off. But I want you guys to stick with me. I want to stress the thematically part. I think objectively, The Force Awakens is probably the best movie of the sequel trilogy, but I think we can all admit that it was pretty much A New Hope 2.0. So thematically, obviously it's going to stick around with Star Wars because it's directly drawing from the first movie that kicked off the whole franchise. Rise of Skywalker, I've already released episodes on that and why I think thematically it does a lot of things wrong and actually hurts the Star Wars franchise as a whole and goes back on themes that have already been established by George Lucas. But I think The Last Jedi encompasses so many different themes across the whole saga, not just the originals. It also brings in the prequels, and it even introduces a bunch of new things that are evolutions of themes that have already been brought up in other movies, but framed in a new way. So if you didn't like the movie, and it makes you angry, and it makes you upset, please give this a listen. Maybe I can give you a new perspective. I don't want to change your mind, because no one likes when someone tries to change their mind. But I hope I can give a new perspective, maybe a new appreciation, and maybe some defense on why people do love it. And then when I talk about the dark side, do the reverse for the people that did love it and the people that didn't like it. So with that all being said, this is the light side, so I will be talking about the themes that I think The Last Jedi does extremely well and even adds to, and the value it does bring to the Star Wars saga as a whole. So everyone, let's take a deep breath and let's get into this. There are multiple themes I want to discuss today, but they all are kind of encompassed under one main heading theme for the whole movie. And I think that's one of the strong suits of The Last Jedi, that it's able to extrapolate a bunch of different themes or sub-themes from its main message. Now, Rian Johnson is pretty on the nose with what his theme is for this movie. I mean, he even has Kylo say it, "Let the past die." And this isn't even just a theme for the movie, it's also a theme for Disney Star Wars. A lot of Disney Star Wars content has relied on nostalgia and member berries. Remember this, remember that, from older Star Wars content. And it's almost hindering it from moving forward and evolving into something new. So while the theme is directly talking about the characters and what they're going through, it's also a view of Star Wars as a whole. Like, we're holding on to the past too much. We need to move forward. Star Wars needs to evolve. It needs to change, while keeping those same principles that George Lucas laid out. So the main theme of Let the Past Die can be interpreted a bunch of different ways with a bunch of different themes that are brought up in the movie. You know, let the past die in relation to moving forward and not letting the past define you or control you is one of the themes. Another way to look at it is letting the past die, not letting it control you, but also learning from it. Not simply trying to suppress it or get rid of it, and because something happened in the past, it's bound to repeat itself, not learning anything from it. Another thing about letting the past die is where you come from, it doesn't matter. You can make something of yourself no matter where you come from. Your past and how you were raised or where you were many years ago doesn't mean that's who you are today. That doesn't mean you can't change the situation you're at now. Now, that's also to say you can fall from grace just as easily as you rose to greatness. And what I really like about the theme is that it is reverberated throughout the entire movie, across a bunch of different characters. And what I think is really strong about it is that it's repeated in our protagonists and our antagonists. Luke and Kylo are mirrors of each other throughout the entire movie because they live by the same ideas of this theme. Luke, because he failed, and like the Jedi failed before him, he thinks the past needs to be forgotten. Everything just needs to be scrapped because he failed. And his struggle is that he didn't learn from that failure, and he became cynical because of his failure. Kylo wants the past to be destroyed because he experienced trauma from what Luke did to him at the Jedi Temple when he was young and an apprentice. He thinks that getting rid of the past will help him move forward. That's why he tries to cut ties with everything that made him Ben Solo. His father, his mother, Luke, obviously. And he just wants to move forward and forget everything about his past. They both want the past to die, and they both go about it the wrong way. Rey is also struggling because she is trying to find her place in the galaxy and is so convinced that her lineage and her parents are going to solve that for her, knowing that information is suddenly going to make everything okay. Even though Finn's storyline is criticized heavily with Rose, his past also is haunting him. He was taken as a child, created to be a soldier in a war he knew nothing about, and this movie explores his ideas on war and whether he wants to join the resistance or leave. He's only known war his whole life, since he was a kid. So does he really want to get back into another war with the resistance? But in the end, it's really about his future and where he wants to go from now, since he can make his own decisions. So with that overarching theme, I want to dive into the first subheading of that theme, that no one is stagnant. George Lucas, whenever he describes the Force and the light and the dark side, he always mentions that you never beat your dark side. It's something you have to fight every day. Your decisions matter, and every day you have to make the right decision, and you have to make the decision to not become that dark side of yourself, whether it be jealousy, greed, anger, fear. You can never get into it, and no matter what good things you've done in your past, you can always succumb to that dark side. This is obviously framed in a sci-fi universe with Anakin and all the villains, or all the people that have fallen from their light side to their dark side. And Anakin is supposed to be that lesson that you can fall, but then you can rise again, and you can make that decision to reject your dark side. Now, as we saw in the prequels, Anakin fell. The good guy became the bad guy. But we knew that was going to happen. Luke, in this film, does the same thing. He gives into his dark side, even if it's for the briefest moment, and audiences weren't expecting it, because he was this symbol of perfection at the end of Return of the Jedi. Even though he showed signs of fearing the dark side and almost succumbing to it in that last battle in Return of the Jedi. He was a moment away from becoming Palpatine's new apprentice. And I know that's an intense lesson for someone who is a hero for generations of people. And seeing a good guy fall from grace by one decision, the one time he didn't overcome his dark side and he gave into it, that decision had a bunch of rippling effects with Ben, obviously. So I think it's even more tragic in this movie than it was in the prequels when Anakin fell, because Luke was always the symbol of hope. Anakin was always the good guy, you knew that, and he was always fun, and you knew deep down he always wanted to do the right thing. But I would never say Anakin was a symbol of hope. So this movie taking the risk to take our biggest symbol of hope and bring him down from his legend status, as they quote in the movie, to being someone that's just like everyone else, and he can make that same mistake, I think is a really profound take on Star Wars and its philosophies that I think no one ever expected, but I think was very much necessary. And I think it teaches a better lesson than Luke being the same Luke he was in Return of the Jedi. And it relates directly to Ben and Rey. I mean, Rey, throughout this movie, you see her calls to the dark side. In the cave, when she's on top of the stone, she shows that she can succumb to the dark side. And once again, Luke is afraid of that. It's one of the reasons he went into hiding, because he failed before, and that has made him cynical. And he's holding on to that past instead of learning from it. Failure is the greatest teacher, as Yoda says in this exact movie. Now, Kylo thinks that destroying the past will help him move on from the trauma that he experienced. He even tries to take out his own mother to prove to himself that he's going to move forward. He's going to reinvent himself as this dark side supreme leader, driven by anger and fear. But he himself doesn't believe it. That's why he couldn't go through with it. And by destroying the past as the theme, it's not saying forget everything about the past, which is Kylo's logical flaw in this movie, and why he takes this theme in the wrong direction. It's saying learn from it, but don't let it consume you. You come to terms with it, you learn to accept it as a part of yourself, and you move on as a stronger person. Because if not, that'll only lead to more suffering. And that's a very true and honest look at real life as well. And so when Kylo thinks his mother's gone, he already took out his dad. He's trying to sever all the strings of his past, which obviously leads to Snoke being on his list too, and him trying to move forward with Rey and trying to get her to learn this lesson as well. Kylo's version of the lesson isn't as good-hearted or good-natured, but he wants to get rid of the past just as much as anyone else, because he thinks that will set him free. And like any great antagonist, they speak some truths, and they make good points. And though Kylo goes about it the wrong way, and the unhealthy way, he's the one that points out this theme the most in the movie. And since I mentioned family, I kind of want to segue into the next part of the theme of letting the past die, as it relates to family and lineage. Specifically, that lineage isn't everything, and it doesn't define you. As I mentioned, Rey's whole conflict is that she needs to be from somewhere. She needs to be related to someone, and she thinks that'll give her purpose. And I think the dark side cave sequence in Act 2 is so well done because it's so subtle, it's abstract, it's not in your face, it doesn't give you the answers, just the way it did in Empire Strikes Back when Luke entered the cave on Dagobah. Each dark side cave operates differently. In Empire Strikes Back, Luke feared the future, or what he could become. So the dark side showed him what his future could be. It's not set in stone, but it's what it could be. And conquering your fears is what Jedi do. You conquer your dark side, because fear leads to the dark side. So if you conquer that, and you don't let this image that it's being shown to you control you, then you've conquered it for that moment. And you can learn to conquer that every day, moving forward. With Rey, this shows fear. It's a fear that she's no one. She's all alone. She's by herself. And she almost gives into it because she really believes that. She needs to be related to someone. She needs to have a lineage. And that's really what it's trying to say, all these dark side caves, and especially in this movie. So when you first see the sequence, you're very confused. You're like, why does she see herself a million times over? What is it trying to say? And when you bring in the themes and you watch the movie a couple times, it connects to a theme that she needs to be related to someone. That's her fear. Her fear is that she's not good enough because she's not related to someone, or she doesn't know who she's related to. It's all about this lineage thing with her, and the Dark Side Cave reveals that. So even though Anakin was somebody from nowhere, he was still gifted. He was the chosen one, someone who couldn't fail because of who he was. He was propped up on a pedestal his whole life. His expectations were sky high, literally Skywalker, sky high. And you also have to remember that obviously lineage wasn't a thing with Anakin because his lineage was what set the whole Skywalker saga into motion. So his lineage did matter, and that's why you can't make the argument that those movies talked about somebody from nowhere, because Anakin's lineage is reverberated throughout the rest of the saga. Everyone now that has the Skywalker last name has that same expectation to, either be the hero or be the worst villain. And what's great about Luke is that he was somebody from nowhere initially, and that's what made him such a great protagonist in the first movie, because you could attach to him and picture yourself as someone from nowhere becoming the hero. But eventually his lineage did matter by the end of Empire, and it was the main focus of Return of the Jedi. And you could even make the argument that in A New Hope, since his dad was this great Jedi that Obi-Wan talked about, there was a level of expectation based on his lineage. So overall, lineage shouldn't define you in any sense of the word. The whole theme of the broom boy at the end of the movie is to say that anyone can be a hero. Anyone can rise up and do the right thing at any moment. And I think the Rise of Skywalker, changing this perspective that Rey was a nobody from nowhere and still being a hero, hurts that theme a lot. Because now, instead of anyone being the hero, the theme changed to, you have to be from somewhere. You have to have this last name to be worth something, to mean something. And I think it was a really profound message to finally break that chain in Star Wars that everyone knew everyone was related to someone, and that's how you got your power, and this is how you made it in the galaxy. And to finally break that chain and teach that lesson to kids, as I've mentioned, Star Wars is supposed to be for kids, that it doesn't matter where you come from, you can make something out of yourself, and that your past, whether it be your lineage or how you grew up, does not define you. You can always make that decision to lean into your light side more than your dark side. Something that Star Wars, in the films, has shied away from. I mean, Rogue One, even Jyn was related to the guy who built the Death Star, or designed the Death Star. Solo continued that theme when it came out, because Han was just somebody from nowhere, and he became a hero. But that was only after The Last Jedi, who had already paved that path. And the next piece of this theme about letting the past die is ironically talking about death itself, something that was mentioned in my Rise of Skywalker Dark Side episode, how death is a natural part of life, and that Star Wars shouldn't play with that concept. Kids need to learn that lesson, celebrate the person's life, rejoice, but don't try to prevent it, because that only leads to fear, anger, suffering, your dark side. Not saying anyone can prevent death in real life, but if you always try to control things, it'll only make you angrier, and it'll only give in and feed into that dark side. So as Yoda says, you have to learn to let go. And that's pretty much saying, let go of the past. This theme that I'm talking about now in The Last Jedi is referencing a theme from Revenge of the Sith, a prequel film. It's acknowledging the prequels. Something that the sequel trilogy hadn't done to this point, really. And that kind of leads into my other theme, which is the Jedi's hypocrisy and vanity. And, what is power? What is a hero? What is failure? Without the Clone Wars, I think the prequels introduced this cool idea of the Jedi Order falling to the dark side in a way that they let their hubris get the best of them. They thought they were the police of the galaxy. They controlled everything. And in that, they lost themselves in their way. They were supposed to be peacemakers, not warriors or soldiers. And that's a theme that's explored in Clone Wars, but it's not very much referenced in the movies itself. So to see a movie actually bring in the prequels and, explain something that, maybe kids might not have understood. I know when I watched the prequels as a kid, I never understood why all the Jedi felt like they failed or they had lost themselves. Like, I never really got that because, the Jedi were always the good guys. Everything they did was right. They fought people because they had to. But in reality, they're supposed to be peacemakers. They're not supposed to be warriors. And Luke, referencing that and saying that the Jedi's past is failure, and that's why it needs to go, because the Jedi had lost their ways. They had become the very thing that you swore to destroy. There you go. Revenge of the Sith reference. And, that leans into the power dynamic. When Luke gives Rey her first lesson, she talks about, the Force is a power. And Luke's like, no, it's not a power. We can tap into it because we are gifted, but we shouldn't abuse that power. It's a balance. It's not about picking up rocks. It's an energy between life, death, and everything. Once again, looking at the Force from a new perspective. It's not a power. It's not something that the Jedi should wield or use against others. It's so much more than that. It's, again, expanding on Star Wars itself, all its lore, thinking outside the box, re-examining the Jedi, the Force, all these principles that we thought were good things, maybe weren't all the time. And while Luke does recognize these things, he holds on to them. It's the past. He's holding on to the fact that the Jedi failed and he failed. So just because they both failed doesn't mean it has to end. Luke's arc is to learn from the past instead of repeating it. Though he did gain knowledge about the Jedi, he didn't try and change them. He simply accepted failure and moved on. Something that he even says in his dialogue, that the history of the Jedi is failure. And when Yoda finally shows up to him as a Force ghost and discusses with him that, failure is supposed to happen. And that's how we learn, and that's how our students learn. That's how our apprentices go beyond what we are. I think that's one of the best quotes in the movie is, we are what they grow beyond. That is the true burden of a master. A master is supposed to pass down his failures, he learns from them, and he passes them on. I mean, think about it. In Return of the Jedi, Obi-Wan and Yoda, who were supposed to be the wisest of the Jedi, were skeptical that Luke could save Darth Vader. They had given up on Anakin. They said, no, you have to kill him. And Luke said, no, that's my father. I'm going to go do what's right. And they said, nope, this isn't going to work. So now here, 40 years later, Rey is in that same situation. She wants to turn Ben. And Luke is skeptical that that can happen because he caused it. He knows that Ben is holding on to the past, and so is he. So they both think they can't rectify it, so screw it. And so while Rey learns all these things about power and the Force, Luke also learns from Rey that the past isn't always the end-all be-all, and that failure is supposed to teach you things, not something that happens and then since you failed, you can't do it again, or you can't learn from it. Do or do not, there is no try. When you try, you fear failure, but when you do, you're giving it your all. There's no apprehension. And if you do and you fail, you learn from it and you move on. If you try and you fail, you say, oh, well, I tried at least, and that's that. You don't learn much. A lesson that Yoda jokes about, he said, young Luke, still much to learn. As an older Luke, he still has stuff to learn. He's always learning. People always are evolving. People should never stop learning or become stagnant. They should always continue to move on. It always reminds me of a quote from Star Wars, or not from Star Wars, but about Star Wars is, Star Wars is poetic. It rhymes. Just like history. It doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. All these mirrors are much different than what The Force Awakens was, where it was almost exact replicas of what happened. The Last Jedi mirrors in different ways what has already happened, which makes it a lot more profound than just repeat the same plot points or same character arcs. And I think in the end it makes Luke a much more compelling character than if Rey just showed up, handed him the lightsaber, and he said, okay, let's get to training, and then just did the same training that Yoda did with Luke in Empire Strikes Back. It wouldn't have been as compelling. Seeing your hero fail teaches you more than seeing your hero succeed, I think. Makes them more relatable. And while Luke was relatable in the original trilogy, after he became that legend, assuming that he's going to stay on that plateau for the rest of his life, I think is unrealistic, and it takes away from him as a character. We saw his failures in the original trilogy, and we should continue to see his failures as he grows older. That's what makes him a character. Characters are supposed to fail and learn. So overall, the main theme that I take away from The Last Jedi, and it's covered in a blanket term, let the past die. You can't let your past control you or define you. Mistakes you made in the past, you need to learn from and move forward, or you'll be destined to make the same mistakes again. And the same could be said about your successes. You may have done the right thing back in the day, but you can't rest on your laurels. Just because you did great things in the past doesn't mean you can't make mistakes today. And that wherever you come from, or any past trauma you've suffered, you control your own destiny moving forward. I think all these themes are newer to Star Wars. They're fresh. They build off old themes that have been brought up in some of the saga movies. And I think overall, they add a lot to the universe and the storytelling as a whole. And that's why I really enjoyed The Last Jedi. So now that I've done all that deep stuff, I'm going to get into some of the technical stuff that I think The Last Jedi did really well that aren't necessarily themes, but I think they do well. First one is, when's the last time Star Wars really shocked you? I mean, think about it from the movie's perspective, or TV shows, but The Mandalorian has come out way past The Last Jedi. When Ben killed Snoke, I know I speak for myself, and I think I speak for the whole theater I was in, no one was expecting that. I mean, that was like actual shock. Not like surprise in Star Wars, not amazement, but like actual shock. I think it was done masterfully to have Kylo get rid of this character that people were so invested in for some reason, that he was the new big bad, but it would just be another rinse repeat of Sidious, this cloaked figure manipulating someone in the Skywalker family. I think Snoke wasn't necessary, and I love that Ryan subverted that expectation and took him out. Look at me. I'm on a first-name basis with the directors now. Yeah, Ryan made a great decision there. George, oh, he's awesome. All right, back to the analysis. And took him out in a satisfying and character-driven way. I mean, you see Kylo literally kill his master, kill the past, someone that has controlled him and twisted your mind. Another Revenge of the Sith reference. I mean, the movie's got gold in the script. And seeing the shock on Rey's face, like, oh, did that just happen? I never understood how Snoke being destroyed in the second movie wasn't satisfying or something great for Star Wars, because I think everyone knew that Ben should have been the villain, especially in Rise of the Skywalker. He should have been the villain of the trilogy, and having his redemption be the trilogy. Didn't think Snoke was necessary. I think his purpose had been fulfilled by that movie. Getting Kylo to be conflicted and turn, even though he still isn't fully onto the dark side, that was his purpose. And then once Kylo fulfilled this and fully committed to, it's me against the galaxy, I think that's way more compelling. And I mean, the throne room scene, I mean, that was, it was incredible. And I think a lot of people can agree that the throne room fight scene was incredible. But I just think aside from the action point, I mean, the story and the narrative choice of it was so impactful. And then seeing Rey and Kylo, discuss their pasts, and Kylo, using his philosophy of destroy the past, and Rey still holding on to the past, and then fighting over that. And then, at that point, you're almost like looking at Kylo. I mean, I remember looking at Kylo and being like, Kylo doesn't have a bad idea here. I mean, it's just been war because of families and lineage and all this other stuff. It's just, let's just get rid of it all and just you and me just run the galaxy. I know that wouldn't have ended well, but I think it was just a subversion of the expectations that was so well done and so earned. I don't know. I loved it. And then speaking of, story arcs, I think it's one of the last things I'll talk about. I never understood the animosity towards the story arcs that the characters took in The Last Jedi based on what was set up in The Force Awakens. I think every character followed the logical path that The Force Awakens set up for them. I mean, I'll start with Luke. I mean, people were really surprised that he was this cynical Jedi that had, given up on his ways. But The Force Awakens, painted him as someone who was in hiding. They didn't want to be found. Like, they literally couldn't find him. The map had been taken out. R2 was hiding it. Like, this is someone that did not want to be found. I just don't understand why people thought that when he got there, he was going to be, cheery and hopeful. Like, he had obviously been challenged with what happened with Ben, and he isolated himself. So I think him being isolated on that planet as a cynical person made a lot of sense, and it wasn't something Rian Johnson did wrong. I think he was just following what was set up for him in The Force Awakens. I think Rey's lineage and her parents, I think it was something built up in The Force Awakens, but I think people made it a bigger deal than it needed to be. I mean, it was a question asked in The Force Awakens, but I think that was just something Star Wars fans were used to. Like, we want everyone to be related. We want someone to come from somewhere. And it was up for interpretation. I mean, it never promised that her parents were anything important. And I think where Rian Johnson took it, that they aren't important. I mean, it's terrible that they left her. Well, The Rise of Skywalker says something about that, but it's terrible that they left her, but she shouldn't be defined by who her parents were. And I think that risk is so good. Finn, I get the backlash for him. I do think he was sidelined in this movie, but I don't think his arc was terrible. I think he was still struggling with the idea of, like, should I be part of the Resistance? Like, what's my place in the galaxy? And going on this adventure and seeing, what war does also makes him think, like, why should I join the Resistance now? Like, they're a part of the war. Okay. Sorry about that. I think that was logical for him to still be doubting that and seeing both sides and being like, well, is it better to join the Resistance? Obviously their cause is better, but it's still feeding this machine of these warmongers that sell weapons and all this other stuff. And I think Benicio del Toro's character was really interesting because of that. I think Poe's storyline or his arc was another thing that wasn't narratively done well, I don't think, but I think contextually, in the first movie, he solved everything by going in guns blazing. And then this movie, the correct move was not to go in guns blazing. The whole Resistance would have been wiped out if his thinking was followed from the beginning of the movie. And by the end, he learns that, sometimes retreating and fighting another day is better in the long run. So I think that's another arc that I think was set up by The Force Awakens that was paid off in this movie. I think he drew logical lines for all these characters moving into this movie. And the last thing I want to put in, because Rian Johnson does get a lot of stuff. And I get it. I do get it. Like, I understand if people are upset with him. Like, I get it. This is a challenging movie. It challenges a lot of things. But the one story I always tell about Rian Johnson and whether he cares about Star Wars or all those people that think he was out to get Star Wars or something. My first Star Wars celebration in Orlando, we were sleeping on the floor, concrete floor, the coldest floor in the world. Like, this thing had to be a block of ice. Before we got the trailer premiere for The Last Jedi, we were in line to get on the panel. So you get there, the night before, 11 o'clock at night, and you sleep through because you want to be, it's a first come, first serve, so you want to be there first. So we were staying up through the night. I can't remember if it was in the early morning, but it had to be like 5 or 6 a.m., and this big crowd starts forming, like, next to the line, and everyone's like, what, is someone, like, famous here? And, out of all the people that could have came out, Rian Johnson, the director, came out and literally greeted all these fans that were sitting on the floor. And he was saying hi to everyone. He was taking pictures. I have a couple pictures of him taking pictures with other people. But, like, this guy is so down to earth. He cares so much about Star Wars fans. And people always try to berate him and stuff. But the true Rian Johnson really does care, because I've been on a lot of those lines, and I've never seen any of the characters or actors come out and greet people. I mean, I might have not been in those lines, but this main big line in the Orlando Convention Center, or Orange County Convention Center, Rian Johnson came out and wanted to see Star Wars fans. And, we'd been sitting on a floor for like 8 hours probably at this point. And he knew that. And he thought of us, and he came out to greet us. So I always tell that story to anyone that wants to bad talk Rian Johnson or anything. Like, regardless of what you think about the movie, the guy cares. The guy's a good guy. He's a great director. He has great vision. He's a good writer too. And I'll say this in another video, but I think they were absolutely right to give him his own trilogy, and I hope they haven't canceled it because of all the years of scrutiny and all that stuff. I really hope he gets to keep his trilogy, because I think all the themes that I discussed today, I think he gets Star Wars on that deeper level. and he wants to take it in a new direction. He doesn't want to just keep repeating it, because Star Wars kind of does sometimes feel like it's in a rut. It's always repeating the thing of lineage and the Force and relying on nostalgia and callbacks to older movies. I think he knows Star Wars needs something fresh, something new to break the cycle. He gets that gray area, and I think he could do a great job in a trilogy with his own characters in a whole different time period. He's not bound by all these other rules, because imagine if this movie came out and he wasn't bound by the other movies in the Skywalker saga. I think he can do great things with new characters, new relationships, new ideas on the Force. I'll always be an advocate for him, because I think this movie, thematically, does everything right Star Wars-wise. Or almost everything right. I do have a dark side of this movie, and I will talk about that, but yeah. And the last thing I'll leave you with, do you guys remember how good the reveal trailer was for The Last Jedi? That trailer was so epic, and the way it ended with Luke saying, "It's time for the Jedi," and the pause, and you're waiting for him to say, "Come back, return," and he says, "To end." Oh my gosh, the entire theater at Star Wars Celebration, when that line was said and then the trailer ended and cut to black, the whole place just was like, what? It was great. Go rewatch it. I mean, it was really something. And if you go on YouTube, you can look up a Revenge of the Sith trailer in the style of this Last Jedi trailer. Oh, man. Chef's kiss. It is so good. Phew. That was a lot. If you stuck with me, if you didn't like the movie and you stuck with me, I really appreciate you listening. I hope you got something out of it. If you did like the movie, I hope I hit on points that you appreciated in the movie. And I hope both of those sides can come together and appreciate and respect each other's opinion. Maybe make this world just a little less divided, to talk about Star Wars, to see where each other's coming from. And yeah, I'll be doing the dark side in the next episode. Gonna go over some themes I don't think The Last Jedi did well, even though I think it did a lot of things well. I think there are some problems with it that definitely turned people off. I think there are some technical things that it failed at as well. But that's the point. We're going to look at the good and the bad, and we're going to bring it together, find the value in it, because I think there is value in most Star Wars things. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed listening. I definitely want to hear your thoughts on social media. Nice ones, not mean ones. If you didn't like it and you didn't like what I had to say in here, that's okay. But let's talk it out. Instagram, at @star_wars_mark of balance. Twitter, @mark of balance. And just let me know what your take on The Last Jedi was. Did it work for you? Did it not work for you? I want to hear both sides. And yeah, once again, can't thank you guys enough for listening. This is the longest one yet, but I think it was very warranted. And I'll talk to you guys soon. Stay healthy, and may the Force be with you.